And yeah, it was incredibly frustrating because we were getting mixes that sounded fantastic on the monitors in the studio, but when the engineer gave us a tape to take away and play on our little systems at home, and that it just sounded terrible. It sounded all muddy, and we couldn't work out what was going on, why these mixes that we had in the studio were sounding great, but then when they were mixed down and we took them away to play them at home, it just sounded a complete muddy mess. So Brendan in particular got completely stressed out with this, and we had a really, really tough time with it. And at the end of the 2 weeks, we had a set of mixes which Brendan was really quite desperate about. So he went to see Ivo, and Ivo listened to them and said, yeah, they, to me they sound okay, but they're nothing on what I've heard you play live. So he agreed to give a little bit more studio time, so we could, in a few weeks later, so we could kind of reflect on it and take, just get over. And Brendan was absolutely exhausted, so he needed to sleep solidly for a little while and just get his mind relaxed again before going back to it. So we had another week in the studio, or really Brendan did, just working on the production and the mixes again, and managed to make some improvements. And then when we went to the mastering studio to have the final thing cut, we were able to get it brightened up a bit again. But it was really, yeah, it's a shame, because I loved the material, the songs that we had on that album. I think there are some great songs on that album, which it doesn't really do justice to. It's not terrible. It's still an album that a lot of people love, and I still love it myself. But if it had been produced with the knowledge that Brendan in particular and experience that he has now, it would have been another thing altogether. But we subsequently recorded a few of the same tracks for a John Peel session, and again with the additional experience, we were able to improve on them, I think, again at that stage. And then even since then, they've been remastered for re-release, those tracks, a couple of times. So if you get one of the more recent remastered mixes, I think, again, they've been improved and they benefit a little bit. But I mean, if you take a song like Ocean that was on that first album, what Lisa used to do with her voice in live performances is totally compressed on the recordings, and you get a sense of it, but nothing like what it used to be when we played it live. And so people who had heard the recording and then came along to our live shows were completely gobsmacked at the difference.
I wonder if there is any somewhere, you might know, in YouTube or one of these places. Of course, we didn't have cell phones at the time, right? So if people using cassette or tape recorders, if there is any recording of the early stuff, 83, 84ish? I wonder, it didn't look.
There is somewhere on YouTube. There's a recording of, if it's still available, of a sound check that we did in Bedford in the UK in 1984. But then the first one that I'm really aware of is there's a recording of a whole show from I think it's Bremen or Bochum in Germany in 1986.
Well, 2 years later. Yeah.
I mean, it's done with a handheld cassette machine in the audience in the gig. It's a bootleg, so the quality's or rather a handheld video recorder.
So the
quality is not great. I think if you look, Dead Can Dance Bremen, 1986, I think it was Bremen. Does that come up?
I will check it out. I will check it out later on when Fraser goes, because.
But so that's really, as far as I'm aware, that's probably the earliest, because we weren't making any videos. We didn't do TV, not because we didn't want to, but we simply didn't get invited to do TV. So we didn't do any TV performances. So there's really nothing, no video, no sort of professional video recording of anything that we did live all through the time that I played with Dead Can Dance. The first real kind of concert performance that was recorded was the one that was done for the Toward the Within album on the 1993 tour, which was the first one that I didn't do.
That's right.
So I missed out on on being a TV star.
Yeah, the beautiful thing also, I really like it about the book, is that you express your shortcomings as well. You know, it's very different to, well, I know how to play drums, freak out in a studio, record deal, playing live in front of, I don't know, maybe 300, 400, are worlds apart, right?
Yeah.
I mean, like a kid, you know, you can play football in England in the league number 4, and then eventually you get to the Premier League, and it's another world altogether, right?
No, it's you know, I mean, there's the different elements to it. You've you know, there are millions of people all over the world who sit in their rooms at home and play an instrument, but to actually be able to get up on stage in front of a sizable audience, or to go into a studio and when that red light goes on and perform is a quite different thing, and it needs a different mindset. And certainly when I first performed live with Dead Can Dance, I mean, we turned up for that first gig that I was talking about earlier in Brixton, and I hadn't even realized that we were going to be playing through a PA system. I never even thought about it. I'd never played through a PA system. And of course, Brendan, Lisa and Paul had been used to, you know, they'd done proper gigs using PA systems back in Australia, and never thought that you know, in the gigs that I'd done with my previous band, we never played with I mean, obviously the singer had a PA and the guitarist had an amplifier, but the drums were never, you know, we were playing small pubs and I was just in the corner of a stage. There wasn't room to mic up the kit. So, so my first experience was turning up for the sound check at the Ace in Brixton, and suddenly finding that my drum kit had been put up on a drum riser, so it was higher up above the stage, which I'd never experienced before. And then suddenly there's microphones all over it, coming in over the drums and over the cymbals, which you have to be careful, obviously, not to hit while you're playing. That's right. And I'm bathed in floodlights coming out, spotlights coming at me from all directions, and I'd never experienced that at all. So it was something. Initially, it was absolutely terrifying, and knowing that we've been put into that gig, you know, it wasn't just a sort of low key thing. We were there on display before Ivo with our record our potential record deal hanging in the balance. So it was quite a big pressure thing. Now, obviously, all the attention's focused on Brendan and Lisa, but even so, I've still got to do my bit. So yeah, I tried to get over a flavour of that in the book, and also a flavour of some of you know, one or two initial small struggles I had in the studio. You know, just because I'd never, those things were completely new to me. I'd never done them before, and I was a competent drummer, but I wasn't a brilliant drummer or a brilliant musician by any stretch of the imagination. So I was already feeling a bit out of my depth, and there were issues with that. But I thought, you know, why not tell that openly in the book, because I think I thought it would be interesting to people, and so it has turned out. People have been quite responsive to that.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm very receptive to that kind of stuff because
well, I think what would be wonderful if somebody who didn't have the confidence to get out and do it came to me and said, reading about how you dealt with that and cope with that and how you went on to do everything that you did after that gave me the confidence to go out and do it as well. That would be great. So
absolutely.
So I thought it was,
as we say before, sometimes you read books, I don't know, a biography of Peter Gabriel, Genesis, Pink Floyd, whatever, right? That I have books somewhere, but reading for somebody who was there from the kind of beginning, not the beginning of Australia, but the beginning of the UK, and for reading from your point of view, what really happened, that's amazing. That's what makes it special,
Yeah, but also, if you go into a bookshop and you look at all the music memoirs lined up on the shelf, then they're generally all big stars. They're people who are, they're the main singers, the main guitarists. They're the big people in the, they've got a big following, big cachet. Whereas for me, I thought the angle for me that is interesting is that. I'm just a guy who loves music, and who had elementary skills in playing an instrument, and just by a chance of fate happened to get this opportunity to play in what would, I'm sure, have become one of my favorite bands of all time. Had I never met them, I would have certainly got to know about them because I was listening to John Peel all the time at that time anyway, and I'm sure they would have become one of my favorite bands, but I actually got a chance to join the band and then touring around the world and recording with them. So it was really extraordinary, and for me, that's kind of that's the backbone of my story.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned several times in the book that the Dead Can Dance, at least at the beginning, well, and probably now, the song were written upside down. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, okay, so that was this was really a lot to do with the way Brendan approaches things. Brendan really sort of he analyzes everything and really thinks about the way music works and how everything is constructed, and that's how he comes to a lot of his really really making the compositions quite different and unique. So before I met him, I was used to, write the few songs I'd written myself, or that going and working with other people and songs that people would bring along to rehearsals. You always tended to get the situation where somebody would write write a chord sequence on a guitar or write a melody on a keyboard or something and come along with a basic format for a song, and then the drummer and the bassist would just put their drum and bass line to that. So Brendan had kind of figured out that this always tended to result in a lot of songwriters just falling into their natural habits with chord sequences or the rhythmic feel that they approach things with. The bassist and the drummer were tending to be very, very passive as creative forces. They would just come along and put standard kind of patterns behind what they've been presented to play to. So the way he liked to approach things was first of all, we would create the drum pattern, not knowing anything about what else was going to be part of that song. We just create a drum pattern. So that each song would have a totally different feel to it. And then once we'd got a drum pattern working that we liked, then he would start working with Paul on the bass line, but not just putting a bass line that just sat comfortably on top of the drums, but something that worked in and out of the drum pattern and would sometimes veer off and then come back in with the drums and just do different things. So we had quite a lot of rehearsals in the early days when I was first working with him, where we just work on drum and bass patterns and not have any other nothing. We wouldn't do anything else for the entire rehearsals. We'd just work on a drum part and then how a bass part would work with that. And then he'd make a basic recording of that on a cassette machine, take that away, and then and then when we came back to the next rehearsal, he'd have the format of a song. But it meant that particularly a lot of pretty much the whole of that first album was written in, and the guy of the Arcane Delights EP was written in that way. And that's how we came up with such a kind of diverse set of songs that have these very different feels to them. And we even had a few other songs that we used to play live at shows at that time, which never ever made it onto record. So we probably had, I don't know, maybe 15 or 20 songs altogether that had all been written in that fashion. And yeah, it was a very interesting process, and it's a process that I've absorbed and have used extensively in my own songwriting ever since.
Really? Wow. Yeah. So after the recording, I Will Give You More Time, you went back to the studio, and they were kind of, Brendan and Lisa say, yeah, it's good enough. Let's go with it. It was like a record deal, like a signed document. Okay, you were going to be part of 4AD at the time, or
we hadn't actually signed the contract at that point. We recorded the album, and then I think it was just after we recorded, we went over to because that's right. At that point, Paul, the original bass player, in between, after we finished doing the first set of recordings for the album, but before Brendan went back in the studio to do the remixes, Paul decided to leave. So in my time with the band, I only ever played the 2 gigs with Paul and then recorded the first album with him. And then he was really homesick for Australia. He hadn't settled in London at all. And he just he was just really unhappy. Which was a shame, because he was an important part of the setup that we had, and he was good to play with. I really enjoyed working with Paul, but he was desperately unhappy, and so he went back to Australia. So we had to find a new bassist for because by that stage Ivo had lined up for us to go and tour in Netherlands with the Cocteau Twins.
Yeah.
But in between time, we went to 4AD's offices and actually signed the record contract. So the first ever recording contract we had with Dead Can Dance was only signed by Brendan, Lisa, and me, because we were the only at that instant we were the only 3 members.
Yeah. Wow, that might be nice memorabilia to have seen that contract. You have a copy somewhere at home?
I think so. Yeah.
That would be great.
That'll take some mining for, but
it will be good one day to. I don't care about the money of what I want to see. What the real thing of it. So then you record, you got the deal, you signed the document, and then I would say, well, now we want to play 8 concerts, I think, in 13 days, right? And then
so that again, that was a completely new experience for me. We were suddenly, given the opportunity, which was amazing, to go on tour as the support band to the Cocteaus, who had this 8-day tour around Netherlands.
Yeah,
and that was an absolutely fantastic experience. I knew a little bit about their music, but not that much. But obviously, going on that tour, I got to go out and watch their set every night. So I got 8 free tickets to Cocteau Twins shows.
Yeah.
It was absolutely brilliant.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was that would to actually be out on the road and playing 8 shows in, I don't know, whatever, 12 days or something was a completely new experience for me. And it was really amazing how just in that short period, how tight the playing became, because we were on stage every night or every other night doing the set. And it really, in such a short time, it becomes second nature. You really settle into it. And that was an interesting experience. But what was also great for us on that tour was that by the Cocteau standards, it was they were playing quite small venues. So we were playing venues that were maybe 400 people capacity.
Wow.
So they were all sold out long in advance. I don't know why they'd been put into, by their standards, relatively small venues. But what it meant was that the audiences were all, so they could try and get their best positions near the stage or whatever, were all coming in, for our act to stake their places. So we were playing to pretty much packed houses every night as well. And the response was great. We had fantastic reception, and we, that really set us on our way.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Then, and of course, I know Cocteau Twins very well, and they, with Robin Goodyear and Liz Fraser, they were, well, they're not together anymore, but they were a great band. I never saw, unfortunately, for one reason or another, I know the music. I have a lot of records from them, but they were, I don't know how, probably they were great, seeing them live, but it was it was very good compliment for the two of you, playing one another at the same night, one before the other, and it's very good.
And also for the audiences to go to a show where they first saw us performing with Lisa singing, and then they got to see the Cocteaus with Liz singing. I mean, that was quite something.
Yeah, Liz Fraser, she has an unbelievable voice. I mean, she kind of later on she became very, very famous with all the other 4AD record, but it's another person who had an unbelievable voice as well.
Oh yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Absolutely.
No, I was in Seventh Heaven because I was playing as part of Dead Can Dance, and then going out the front and watching the Cocteaus every night. It was just I thought life doesn't get any better than this.
Absolutely. And I have never met Ivo. I think Ivo is here in the United States. I think he moved somewhere to a farm or.
Yeah, he keeps very, very private these days. He went through some difficult times and decided to completely get out of it. So he keeps his head down these days.
Yeah, but the kind of bands that were in the 80s, in gothic rock, dream pop, like Bauhaus, Cocteau Twins, Modern English, Dead Can Dance, the Pixies, Throwing Music, the Sport and Coil later on. Unbelievable, that type of music. I mean, it's still 80s, now we are year 2022, 40 years later, they're still so appealing to me, that kind of music,
No, it was a classic period. I mean, that's well documented and is the opinion of a lot of people. So to have actually been part of that, and Ivo gave me the opportunity to also be involved in some of the things that the other bands were doing. So I did a couple of sessions where I recorded some additional percussion for the Wolfgang Press. I did a bit on one of the tracks for Peter Newton of Zymox, and they did on the album that he did with Michael Brook. I did some rehearsals with Modern English. And it was an amazing time. It was a fantastic experiences, and great to work with all those people. Yeah,
you mentioned the book that kind of Dead Can Dance again was associated with a gothic community, if you will, right?
Yeah, so it was. I mean, we never set out to be part of the goth scene. And the Dead Can Dance name, as I explain in the book, the way Brendan explained it to me is just simply that the music is another way of bringing dead things to life. Or rather, all art forms are basically the bringing of dead things to life. So if you make a painting, then you take pigments and oils and things and mix them together, and you use a brush that's made out of wood and bristle and whatever, and then you put all those elements together and you put that onto the canvas and you create a picture, and a life force comes out of that picture. And so it is with music. you take instruments that are made out of wood and metal and plastic and whatever, all dead things, and when you use those instruments to create a song and bring a piece of music into being, you create life out of dead things. So the name Dead Can Dance just simply came from bringing life out of dead things, and dance was used as a word that symbolizes life in music. But obviously, once that name came into being, we started getting, the first thing came out in NME, and we were called Bone Shaker Babes, and there was, pictures of dancing skeletons and things. And it wasn't really what we'd ever thought of. I mean, we never used that kind of imagery for the band. Obviously, on that first album cover, which became quite iconic, the mask that was used on the cover of that is again the same principle, that you take a piece of wood, carve a face out of it, and then put it on, wear it as a mask over, and suddenly that takes on a life force.
Ooh.
So again, it was that was the concept that Brendan had, and that we were putting out as what Dead Can Dance meant. But it kind of got slightly skewed and came into this this area of death, dancing in graveyards or skeletons and whatever, and kind of made us appeal to the goth community. And then 4AD again, Ivo never set out to be a label for the goth movement, but obviously by having Bauhaus on the label, that naturally gave it that element. And I wouldn't say that. In fact, I can't really think of another band on 4AD that I would say are obviously an out-and-out goth band, but it did, it all sort of added to that. That sense of it. So we ended up getting a lot of goths coming along to our shows, but having said that, we were very happy to welcome that audience, and particularly it was certainly the case in the UK, but very much when we went to France.
Oh yeah,
a huge element of the audience were used to turn up in goth uniform. But they were a massive, a hugely important part of our audience, and were very receptive, loved the music, and we loved them as a fan base. So so it was never there was never any issue with it. It was absolutely fine, but it wasn't what we set out to. It wasn't something. It wasn't a premeditated thing on our part to go for the goth audience by any means.
That's right. Feel free to something funny to mention. You guys have a couple of experiences in France. I think the first one was the PA system went out, and the people were screaming at you as if you have destroyed, broken the things. And then Brendan went to collect the fee, and like 12 people of karate type.
Yeah, this was one particular show in Marseille, the first tour that we ever did in France, and it was very much on on a shoestring thing. We still didn't have any money at this point. It was also in 1984, and we'd had all sorts of disasters going on. Brendan's dad's van broke down even before we got to the first gig, so we had to abandon his van. He had to go home, and we had to reorganize. The first show had to be cancelled, and other things had gone on, and we'd been having a bad time. And we finally got to this last show in Marseille, and it was a very odd sort of nightclub type of place. And it turned out that the promoter at this show had the band, the Lords of the New Church, were there hanging around. No, they weren't scheduled to play or anything, but they were just happened to be in the area at the time, and he knew them, and they were hanging out at his venue. And they were massive in France at the time. They had Brian James, the guitarist from The Damned, was with them by that stage. And Stiv Bators was a singer, and they were really big in France at the time. So this promoter approached us and said, "Look, when you've finished your set, would it be okay if Lords of the New Church came on stage and did a couple of numbers for the audience? You know, it would be great. They're prepared to do it." So we said, "Look, once we've finished our set, you can do what you like. We don't care." But they're not using our equipment, because they had a reputation for smashing guitars up on stage and, kicking drum kits around. And we just couldn't afford that. We were still using really cheap equipment, but it was the only thing we could afford. And if anybody smashed our equipment up, that we couldn't do anything else. That was it. We couldn't afford to replace it. So the promoter was really annoyed, because this was a big thing for him, that he could have the Lords of the New Church do an unannounced sudden special appearance, but they didn't have any gear with them. They were just hanging out in the area, so it couldn't be organized. So that didn't go down well. And then this PA turned up that we'd actually used in a previous show a couple of nights earlier, but in a tiny venue. And it was a really old PA with all like steam valves in it and everything. And it just about cope with the tiny venue. But in this place, we just knew it wasn't going to be sufficient. It didn't have the proper limiters on it to stop the speakers blowing. So we just thought, we told the promoter, we said, we're going to have a problem with this PA. He said, no, it's going to be fine. It's going to be fine. So, okay. So we went ahead, started the show. The place turned out to be really, really packed. There was a good, I don't know how many it held, but I mean, maybe 200 or 300 people in there. But the Lords of the New Church and their little entourage were all sitting on one side, and they were obviously all completely stoned. And we were a few numbers into the set, and they started heckling, and because of Lisa, they started shouting out all this stuff about "how's your Barbie, mate," and all this, and Australian accents and ridiculous stuff. And then the promoter had given them all these bottles of champagne to try and keep them in his club and keep them happy. Yeah. And one of their group, I think one of their roadies or whatever, got hold of an empty bottle of champagne and was clearly about to throw it at the stage. And we had this guy our promoter who'd set up the tour, had this friend that he brought with him to help drive us around in the van that they'd hired after our original one blew up. This guy called Walter, who was a lovely guy. He'd been really placid up to that point, very helpful, helping us moving the gear about, etc., driving. And we suddenly saw, we were up on stage playing, but we suddenly saw him, his body come flying across the table, and just the guy who was about to throw the bottle, he just smacked him straight in the face and knocked him out. And then the whole thing went off. So we're now about 3 numbers into our set, trying to carry on playing, and there's this huge brawl going on with tables and chairs flying through the air, bottles flying through the air, and Lisa's kind of Lisa and Brendan have seen it all before in the pubs in Australia that they used to play. You know, it wasn't particularly anything that threw them. So we just carried on playing, hoping that it would all kind of calm down.
Yeah.
But then the inevitable happened, and the PA system blew up. So suddenly, you know, my drums are still coming through, but everything else, all the electronics have all gone. So then the audience thought that we'd stop playing because they couldn't hear anything anymore, and so turned on us. So we're now thinking, you know, we've had it. We've got to get out of this place. So we started, but obviously we couldn't leave our gear behind. We couldn't just run out of the place. So now we're trying to carry all the equipment and the amps and the drums and everything back through the audience where there's still this wild punch up going on, trying to keep out of trouble. But then the guy who owned the venue, he suddenly magicked up all these bouncers from somewhere who were not trying to sort out the problems that were going on inside the venue, but we found out afterwards that he told them to stop us leaving with our gear because we'd blown up his PA and he wanted compensation for it. So they turned on, and these guys were all trained karate exponents, actually in their black, you know, karate outfits.
Really?
So we're trying to carry the gear out, and they came at us. And I got kicked over, and I managed. In the end, I managed to sort of stagger out and pull a few bits of my kit out with me. And I think Lisa and James had got out, but we didn't know where the others were. So it turned out Brendan had been upstairs in a huge argument with the promoter over everything. But our bassist at that time, by that stage, Scott, and also this Walter, the guy who'd punched a guy with a champagne bottle, they'd been pulled off into a side room and given a good beating by these bouncers. So it was just, I mean, it was just, the whole thing was total chaos. In the end, they were okay, thankfully, and we managed to salvage all our equipment and we got out of there. But yeah, it wasn't one of the most normal Dead Can Dance shows. Did Brendan end up collecting the fee or not? So we didn't get the fee on that night, but afterwards we did get about half the fee come through. And I'm never quite sure how that happened. It came via our French promoter, and I think it came from the Lords of the New Church Management, because they realised with retrospect that they hadn't really done us any favours with what happened there. But I'm not, to this day, I'm not really sure what happened there. But we did end up getting
that's a funny story. I think it's a good point for you. Please show the book if you don't mind. You have it handy? Yeah, I mean, that's a great book for
Exhibit A. It's obviously this part here is a little extract from the original Dead Can Dance cover,
right?
And the lettering as well. The Dead Can Dance is in the book designer borrowed again from the cover of that first Dead Can Dance album.
Yeah.
So that's it. It's a very nice hardback book. Some interesting photographs in there, some that people won't have seen before.
Absolutely, yeah, and it's a very well written book, easy to read and funny. I have a lot of good stories there, and it's you know where. Yeah,
well, there again. I mean, obviously, it's a serious book about about what happened and our love for music, but funny things did happen. There were funny incidents, so those are included. And I think a lot of people had this idea that because Dead Can Dance musical performances and a lot of the music on the albums tends to be quite heavy and dramatic and sincere, that we spend all our time, sitting around reading Proust and having great philosophical discussions and sitting around being very gloomy. But it wasn't like that at all. We were, if you're, in order to put that much into your music, you need to have your outlets as well. And both Brendan and Lisa have great senses of humor. Lisa actually is one of the funniest storytellers that you'll ever meet. So she regularly used to have us all in hysterics. And there were funny times. So I try and get a flavor of that across as well, because it gives the balance of how it really was.
Yes, absolutely. I interviewed Lisa. I have never met her personally. Right. An interview with Brendan is coming soon, I hope.
Oh, okay.
And he's a very nice guy. I think Brendan is more kind of introvert, shy, if you will, at least at the beginning. Hard to get to know the guy, right?
He's very. The way they respond in interviews, I would say, is very, very similar to the way they approach writing their music. It's their natures. So Brendan tends to be much more considered in the way he goes about answering questions and how he structures his answers and so on. Whereas Lisa tends to come very much from the heart, very direct, very, very responds just the way she feels in the moment. And that was always very much the way they were on stage and in rehearsals and in their approach to writing. They're both very passionate, but Brendan's always he's thinking through every single element, whereas Lisa just likes to be seized by the moment, by the atmosphere of where she is, what she's doing, and just responds in a completely natural and in some ways almost on an astral plane, or some kind of out of body experience, the way she performs sometimes. So they're different in that respect, and I think that comes across quite nicely often in interviews as well.
Absolutely. And then you guys went back to London, and then I think it was the time of the album This Mortal Coil. Right, and then I think that particular
the first
Son of the Siren became very popular. Is that right?
That's right. That really was the song that launched that whole This Mortal Coil project, and became a massively important spine through really everything that went on in 4AD for many years after that. It created some dramatic highs and lows for people, and also I think some various points of controversy and awkwardness in the future, but it's an amazing song. It's a very emotional song. And the arrangement that Robin and Liz came up with for it is incredible. Very very spacious, very, very moving. But then, there's been so many more versions of it by all sorts of different people since then. I think it was Ivo's desire to do it that put that. I mean, obviously, with Tim Buckley's original, it was a well-known song. But I think what Ivo did in bringing it out through This Mortal Coil's version was to really put it on another level altogether.
Absolutely, yeah.
And